guys, welcome to another episode of Wargamers Shut Up and Build. This looks like a lot of stuff, but we're going to go through what we're doing with it. Basically, this video is going to be to build simple hills, and they're actually not very expensive. We'll go over the cost quickly a little bit later. What we have here is we've got our flocking that we made in the previous video, or rather our turf. So, I'm not sure if you guys got a good view of that last time, so I just wanted to make sure that everybody did. This we're going to be using, although towards the end steps. We've got our glue. Now this glue is probably better to use overall, so this is just tacky glue. It's like a thick Elmer's glue or a thick school glue. For this video we're going to be using a glue gun, which isn't ideal for this foam because it does melt it a little bit, but for the sake of time, this will be a lot easier. Not to mention, I think we can cover up any mistakes we make anyway, so it's not a big deal. The thing about this video is I wanted this to be a cheap option. So we are using this foam. Now this foam is your standard white foam, and it is the least ideal foam to use, but it is something you can use. I would normally recommend pink or blue foam, but if you have to go out and buy it versus if you have this stuff laying around at home somewhere, just use this stuff, it's going to be fine. We've got some foam board, which is just your standard sort of foam board. We're going to use this as the base. Again, you're better off using like a thin MDF, but it's harder to cut, it's harder to work with, and not everybody has access to it. Foam board, pretty much everybody has access to. If you don't have this, you could just use some more foam. The problem is that you're gonna have a little bit of breakage in the bottom there, so it's kind of not ideal. We've got a sanding sponge. This is 120 grit. This is probably the perfect grit for this project. And we're going to use it to sand down the foam as well as this stuff. This is drywall spackling. You can use drywall spackling, or you can use plaster of Paris or any kind of plaster. If you start going the plaster route, it's going to be harder, which means it's going to take longer to sand, which is going to be a little bit harder, or more difficult rather. But this is not too bad, and this big tub is like $8. It's not a huge tub actually, but yeah. Again, cheaper options, plaster of Paris. Cheaper than that, you can go with this stuff this stuff dries in about 15 minutes. If you wanted to go super cheap, you can go and get the big tubs for about the same cost as this, of this stuff that takes 24 hours to dry. It just takes longer, which I'm a little impatient, so I'm not going to do. We've got our tools, so we've got something to spread the drywall stuff with. We've got, and I picked this up at the dollar store for $1, so again, not expensive. This is what I happen to have to saw down this foam. Now, normally this foam is going to go everywhere, so if you have something like this, great. If not, any kind of saw will do. The smaller the teeth, the better off you are. We have a couple of hobby knives. Hobby knives, believe it or not, are not great for cutting deep into this, so that's why we're not using these for that, but they may come in handy here. And we have a black Sharpie. Additionally, we have our paint that we're going to be using. Just apple barrel craft paints. You can get smaller bottles for this kind of project, and that's fine. Those are also not expensive. Again, dollar store item. We've got our ballast, and as I mentioned in the previous video, you can use just regular sand if you have to, or just the fine ballast. You don't have to go fine and coarse, but I feel like this gives us more variety when we're dry brushing, so that's what we've got. So again, we're building a hill for our war machine table. We might actually I'll probably do 2 hills, but we'll just film the one, and we'll go from there. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to trace out two shapes. One's going to be bigger than the other, and they're going to be sort of hill shaped. It doesn't have to be super exact, it doesn't really matter, and I suck at drawing anyway, so we'll go with something like that. Then we want another one that's kind of smaller, so we're going to go... Actually, you know what, we will... No, it doesn't matter, sorry. And that's probably fine. Now, you can better utilize this space, it doesn't really matter. Again, this is the cheapest possible route to go, so to me, wasting a little bit of it's not the end of the world. Now is the fun part. So this is going to cause a huge amount of mess, but we're just going to try and cut off some of the bigger parts actually. So we'll not going to cause too much of a mess. And right now we're just kind of blocking off the sections that we've kind of outlined. The pink foam and the blue foam are less messy to work with. They don't flake off like this. They're sort of like an MDF versus I guess a cork almost. That makes sense to you. So we've got kind of our general shape, and we're going to just try and trim it down a little bit more. And it doesn't need to be exact. You'll see why. But the more we can kind of trim down this way, the easier our life is. Because although this is making quite a bit of mess, it's not making anywhere near the same kind of mess as using a hobby knife or just breaking in half might. This is going to all be vacuumed up, so we'll check that out. And I know some of you are looking at this and kind of cringing because of the mess, but again, this is the cheap option. And we can even just leave that little bit there, it doesn't matter. So, one thing about this project is we're going to be going 2 levels high, or 2, I guess these are probably 3/4 of an inch thick. So we're going to go to 1.5 inch tall at the highest. You could go higher, but I feel like this makes it easier to measure from, and if we go any higher, our slopes at the top are going to be, they're going to be more, pardon me, I feel like our slopes at the top are going to be more narrow, and that could make it difficult to place models on, so I don't really want to go that route. And actually, we're going to just grab this Sharpie again, just to maybe make this a little more circular. Yeah, that's probably fine. Okay, so we've got our one big piece. We'll clean this off before we go to the next step, but, or actually no, we'll clean it off after we do the next step. I feel like that, this way, cutting with the little saw. I've heard drywall knives work really well for this, but I haven't experimented with it yet, so if you have given that a try, put a comment in the description below and just tell me how it works out on this kind of foam, because this is the Citadel saw, the fine saw, and it works great for this, but I don't think people need to be spending $18 to $25, whatever the hell it costs these days, on this tool for the purpose of making this terrain. That being said, if you have this lying around, you're in good shape. You can use a regular carpenter's knife, but you're going to have more mess. So if you do that, just be prepared for the mess. Conversely, you could probably just break it off in pieces, and you get kind of a more natural feel, but it might be more difficult to sand down. So, so there we go. We've got our 2 parts, just regular parts. You can use regular school glue, Eileen's tacky glue, or tacky glue of any kind. Wood glue, any glue really works. It's just a matter of we don't want to wait for drying time. So you see, the problem here is it is kind of melting our foam a bit. Oh shit! I probably did too much. Yeah. So this glue gun in particular is quite hot, and it's going to melt quite a bit of our foam off, but that's probably okay. So again, in this kind of environment, inside of an office or inside of a studio or a room, you probably want to have good ventilation. You want to have a respirator or a mask. You want to have stuff so that you're not actually just breathing this stuff in. And you'll see, like, this looks kind of ugly right now, but when we move on to the next step, it won't actually matter. So I probably should have glued the bottom part of the top piece and then hung it sort of suspended in air so that the glue didn't seep too far down into the foam. As you see, we've got some pretty deep recesses. It's not going to matter too much, but it's something I could have done a little bit better on this. But it's fine. As you see on the bottom, it hasn't gone all the way through, so it's not too big a deal. And again, because we're using super cheap foam, if we have to, we could just replace it. So what we're going to do is we're just going to start sanding down the edges, because again, it's supposed to be a hill, it's not supposed to be a plateau. Although you could make it a plateau, and that's fine too. But now, because we're using the cheaper foam, again, we're going to have some break-offs, like fuller size pieces, especially if we aren't sanding super cautiously. So we'll slow it down a little bit. And the nice thing about doing terrain in general is that you can use a lot of random stuff that you just have kicking around the house. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to go out and buy all this stuff. You don't have to go to the store and spend all your money getting materials so that you can make terrain. Okay, so let's try and, whoops. Okay, so that's probably pretty good. We are fairly well sanded down. You could do more, but I don't think it's really necessary. So we're gonna be done with that part. I'm gonna clean up, and we'll carry on to the next step. Okay, and we're back. So now what we're going to do is we're going to glue our hill down to our foam core, and then we'll cut our foam core out. You could do it the other way, where you cut the foam core out first, but I feel like you get the best opportunity to cut out the shape that you want by doing it this way. Additionally, if you wanted it to be wider, you could. I think we've got a good amount of space though, so what we're going to do is we're actually going to put the glue on the foam core so that it cools down a little bit before we glue our hill down. Probably enough time. And then I'm not going to bother drawing on it. We could have, but I'm not sure that it matters that much. I'm just going to cut. Just eyeball it. Fix that in a minute. Now that only works if you've got a really sharp blade, which I do, but that's okay. So this is going to be kind of a large hill. When you think about a 4x4 foot table, you don't have a huge amount of surface area to work with. And War Machine's a game where it benefits well from having a decent amount of terrain, but you don't necessarily need tons of terrain to play it. So here's our hill at this point. We've glued it to our foam core or our base. Again, MDF is probably better for this purpose, but and you'll get more use out of it, like it'll last longer if it's MDF. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our, this is a DAP product. You can use basically any kind of drywall, spackling, drywall compound, plaster of any kind. It's just a matter of how much you want to have to sand it down afterwards. So this stuff is pretty soft. Once it's done, it shouldn't be too bad to sand. And we basically are just going to slather a bunch of it on. It doesn't really... Now, if you're doing like a huge table, this stuff can get kind of heavy, so you probably want to find a lightweight product. This is not a lightweight product. Lightweight products are more expensive, but there's a legitimate good use to it. So, and we're just going to basically try and even out our hill even more. So the more time you spend in the sanding process, the less of this stuff you have to use. Additionally, the less drying time you have. This stuff is meant to dry in about 15 minutes, although on the thicker parts where we are covering up kind of holes, it's going to take probably longer than that, so it's not a big deal, just something to keep in mind. When we come back, what we'll do is we'll sand it down, put some ballast, paint it, and then put some flocking, although there will be a bit of a break between when we put the ballast down and when we paint it, obviously. Alright, so this took quite a lot longer to dry than I anticipated. I figured this would be, you know, I don't know, maybe an hour, 2 hours to dry because the deeper recesses in between the layers of foam, but it ended up taking basically 24 hours. And you could, before you could see pink through here, so you could see pink here, it looked like a bullseye almost. But yeah, the way I would deal with that is next time what we do is we just take 2 layers of foam, put them on top of each other, and then cut out our circle at kind of an angle, and then that way we'd have less empty space. So, okay, we're on to sanding. So we've got our sanding block that we used for the foam previously. We're going to just sand this down as our next step, and this should sand really easily. I basically just want to make as smooth a surface as we can without hitting the foam. Okay. So it's pretty much done. What we're going to do is we're going to move on to the next step, and I'm going to clean this up first. Okay, on to the next step. So, what we're doing here is we're going to cover the whole thing in glue, and we're going to glue our ballast down. Now, this, again, is another messy step, so if you haven't noticed, this whole tutorial is kind of messy. But for this, we're going to just take our tacky glue, or school glue, whatever white glue you happen to have access to, and we're just going to put a whole bunch of it into, actually, you know what? We're going to put a whole bunch of it into a cup. We don't need, like, a huge amount of it, but we do need some, enough to cover the whole surface of this. If you're short on ballast, another way to do this is just do patches, but I find that with patches, the end product isn't quite as nice. And then we're going to mix in a bunch of water. So we've got, I don't know if you can see this or not, but we've got up to about here in glue and about the same amount of water. And we're going to mix that around and we're going to see if that's okay for us in terms of consistency. So it should still be a paste, but it should be like a thin paste that kind of moves around. Think of like the consistency of house paint. Maybe a little bit thicker, but about the consistency of house paint is ideal for what we're doing here. And we basically want to cover our entire surface. Now, we're in pretty good shape here. And then we put on the ballast. Now, we're going to sprinkle the coarse ballast on, and this will provide some of our larger rocks. fine. And then we will sprinkle on our fine ballast. Now, again, this is not a this is a messy step, so be aware. And a lot of the fine ballast won't actually be glued down. So you'll see afterwards when we pick this piece up, we're going to have a lot of stuff come off of it. So try and get this as even as possible. Make sure you do get a good layer on it. This should be totally glued now, so what we're going to do is we're just going to shake off the sand, then I'm going to clean it up and we'll start painting. So let's see how this actually ends up looking. Like I said, there's quite a bit of sand there. And so that's pretty good. Like, you do see the coarse ballast through the fine ballast. So it actually has done exactly what we want. The texture is pretty good, and the coverage is pretty good. There's a couple places where it is a little sparse, but and there's some glue on the ground, but it's not too bad. Like here and here, that's basically it. So that's fine. We can just paint over that, and we don't have to worry about it. So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna paint it with just a black craft paint. Now you could use an airbrush, or you could use some regular primer, but for this step it's not super critical, so we're just going to use regular old apple barrel craft paint. Any kind of craft paint should be fine. This is what I had access to, so this is what I've got. Alrighty, so we're going to paint the whole thing black. Basically just going to spread it. The reason why we want to water down the paint a little bit is because this way it does get into all the little cracks and crevices. It being a little bit thinner, if some of the rocks end up showing through, that's not a big deal because we're going to be dry brushing after this, so hitting those raised edges will be fine. But that's basically it for this part. I'm going to go clean up my brush and we'll let this dry and then we'll carry on to the next part. So when you're doing this, just keep in mind that the drying times will vary. In my case it took, well, I left it for basically 24 hours, so we're basically just going to do a kind of a heavy dry brush of this brown, again in apple barrel paint, onto our project here. We're basically done this step. Okay, so the next step we're going to take some of this apple barrel antique white, which is kind of a cream color. It's actually fairly bright. We might want to mix it in with a little bit of brown, but not a whole lot. Which is entirely optional, but I'm taking that option. So, very little paint. And we just want to do a light dry brush on top. That's it. That's all for this step. We're going to take our water and glue mix again. 2-part glue, 1-part water. So what we want to do here is we want to put the glue all over the model, with the exception of small patches where we actually want to see some of the ground. Now the ground texture should only be about maybe 10% of this model, so be liberal with the glue. And again, this glue is quite a bit thicker than the last time, and that's okay. In fact, I think our glue last time was a little too thin because it did take quite a long time to dry. Okay. And so we take this turf blend that we made in the previous video. We make sure that it's well blended, mixed up a little bit. I'm pretty happy with this stuff. And we just kind of dump it on. That's really a little much. And we cover the whole thing like we did in the sand portion. Anything that's extra we'll shake off, and we're good and covered. So there is at least twice as much stuff on this as there is going to end up being. This is now finally glued. This has been, I left it for quite a while actually. I left it for about a day almost. And we're going to just shake off the excess and see what our hill looks like. So, if you guys remember, well, I'm sure you do, because you just watched it, we put an awful lot of excess. A whole lot of excess. Now, from here, we still want to matte coat it, but I'm going to be doing that outside, so I'm not going to bother filming that. We're just going to spray it with a spray, and that's fine. Matte coat will protect it a bit, seal in some of the flock that's, or the turf that's a little bit not glued down as well as some of the others. And it'll keep our nice matte appearance, so. Alright, and that's our hill. So, please like, comment, subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll post, well, you'll see some closer pictures. Also, you'll see them in our battle reports when we get to those.